So I've gone through and I've named all of my electrons, and they're all more or less on the same height plane. So I'm going to want to change that just a little bit. So I'm going to raise them up or down if they are in the same shell. And the reason I'm doing that is so that they don't bump into one another, because if they bump into one another, they will bounce back the other way. So we want to try and avoid that. Now, if they're all going in the same direction, of course they won't bump into one another, but we might not necessarily have that happening. So I'm just going to change them a little bit here and there, make sure they're not in the same field, so that I have to worry too much about them bumping into one another. Now, the next thing I want to do, and normally I would have done this first, is I'm going to change the environment. So click on environment. I'm going to make it dark. I like the dark environment for building if I'm not putting it into a specific place. It makes it easier for me to see, but that's a preference between yourself and how you want to build. So now I've got my camera. My camera's focused on the scene, and if I were to look at it, it looks just like this. In fact, no item with that. So I have some old code left in here. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that and make sure I don't have anything in here I don't want. Yeah, it looks like I've got everything I need. Perfect. So that's a good way for you to see all the objects in your screen. So I've now clicked on coding. I've selected Blockly, and I am going to start making these things move. So the first thing I need to do, if I look at my different coding choices, what makes things move is transitions. So I'm going to click on transitions. Now this one's just to move it straight forward. And I'm actually going to hide this screen so I can see this full screen. This just moves it straight forward. This one moves it to a point. This one's going to spin it around itself. This one's going to spin it around in a different direction. This one will spin it around an origin point. This is the one I'm going to use here, where I'm going to spin it around it by a radius. So I'm going to select that. And I have E1 already. Move it clockwise. I can't do 360, but I can do 359, which is going to get me close as possible to my end. And those cubes were about 3 meters away from the center. So I'm going to make the radius turn 3 meters. Now watch what happens when I push play. Watch what happens to 1. 1 is going around. It went all the way around and stopped. We don't want it to stop. In fact, we want it to go on forever. So I'm going to go to control flow and click loops. Loops is when you tell your computer to do the same operation over and over again. So if I did this one, loops, repeat, it says 10 times, and do, the do is to turn all these things. So 10 times in a row, it's going to do that. Well, I want it to go on forever. So I'm going to go down here to math. And in the math button here, there's a button that says pi. I'm going to take the pi one out, and obviously we don't want it to go pi times. So I'm going to use the drop down to make it go infinity. Now, E1 will go infinity times. It will continue to go around and around and around the nucleus as long, or the center of the atom, as long as we run the program. So great, that one's running. So now I want to duplicate that. So I can hit duplicate. I want to change it to E2, because that's my other electron in the first shell. And click play. Now you'll see, oh, E2 is not moving. So let's fix that. Why isn't E2 moving? Great question. So the reason is this piece of the program is going to run before this one does. If we want them to run at the same time, we need to go back to control flow and get this block that says execute in parallel. That's going to tell your computer to run both these pieces of program at the same time. Now, of course, we want 6 electrons to move around. So and there's only 2 spots. So if I go back here, I'm going to add these tasks to the bottom, and you'll see it's starting to drag down and make empty spaces. Then if I click the wheel again, that will go away. Now I've got 4 empty spaces. So I can take this and duplicate it again. Now, instead of E2, I'm going to move E3. And remember, if we had said those were 5 meters away, and in 5 seconds. So I'm going to duplicate this enough times to fill all of my electrons. So that's just a right click and then a duplicate. And then I'm going to make sure I am switching to each one. So E4, E5, and this is why it was important to make sure you've picked the correct name. So now let's see what's happening with our electrons. And one of the things we're going to have to do, I did not do this yet, is to go back to our camera, double click on our camera, go to the camera option and select fly. This means we won't fall down. Which means you can look on it from up above. I'm going to back out, and what I notice is that many of my electrons are not actually going around. In fact, all I'm really getting going around are 1 and 4, and there's a reason for that, and the reason is simple. We are not facing the correct way. So I need to click on them and just turn each one until I get that one correct. So I'm going to do this one at a time until I make sure they are going around correctly. This is a little bit of the trial and error piece, and this is exactly why you don't want to use the spheres. So I'm also going to raise my camera up so that it can look down upon this atom a little better, and I can see a little quicker which ones are doing what I want them to and which ones aren't. So let's see. 5, still not going the right way. The other option is I can turn it to spin the opposite direction. So let's see if that helps. Now we get 5 going around in its shell. Thing is, it's still not quite going around the way we want it to. So we're going to keep playing with these. And the idea now is that we have them all moving. We just have to play with the direction in which they are facing until we get them all moving around the cell nucleus the way we, or the cell, the atom the way we want them to go. So go ahead and play with those, get them to work, get them to go in the correct directions, and you will have your functioning atom atomic model.